All right. Good evening, everybody. I did not remember that it would be sports day today. So we'll just get started. And if anybody else joins, then that's good. If not, then we should just get underway. All right. So, good evening once again, and happy pre-Ash Wednesday. Happy one-day midterm holiday. James, this I'm sure we all miss high school or primary school because we know that we would get the rest of the week off. But unfortunately, adult life is not as glorious as that. All right, so here we are on a Tuesday evening going into a night, and we will be looking into securing web servers. The title says securing web servers, but in general, it must be about securing your web applications and, well, the servers that they sit on. Because if you have one vulnerability, it can lead to another domino effect. And I mean, somebody can use your website to access other internal systems because security is flawed. So one part of being a website administrator is part web developer, right? And the website administrator makes sure that the website is hosted and the server is up. And then you're also part sysadmin when it comes to server uptime and maintenance. All right. At least if you're playing that role, like I've had to play that role, all three of those hats in one place. Sometimes you'd have that nice division of labor where you have the developer who builds the website, then that gets handed off to maybe a system engineer or so on, system analyst, whatever, lead developer, who then maintains the server and the website and or maintains the website rather. And then you have a system administrator separately who maintains the server itself. So it's nice if you have the division of labor, but sometimes you'll have to wear all three hats. So it's important to be multifaceted and to appreciate what each person does. You might even have to play DB administrator also to some extent. All right, so enough of my monologue. Let's get into the fun stuff. All right. So we'll just jump right into it and we'll start looking at some of the attacks that we can expect having hosted a website or a web application. So the first one on our list is a denial of service attack. So essentially, denial of service, the denial of service attack generally, it tries to hinder traffic from getting, let's say, in and out of your server effectively. All right, so essentially, like we've discussed, each time somebody tries to load your website, they're loading a resource or resources from your websites. These resources comprise your HTML pages or whatever web engineer using those pages, other assets like your style sheets and your JavaScript files and your images, etc. Also, if it is a page that calls from a database, that's also a database call. So as a web developer, you usually try to minimize as much as possible how many resources are required to load one page. More resources, the longer the load time. So the more intensive the query, well, the more inefficient the query, then the longer it will take. And even if the query is efficient, the more data that has to come one time is the more longer it will take. So stuff like that affect how long a user will take to load your website. Now, with the denial of service attack, what they try to do is they try to flood your web server with as many requests for those resources as possible, such that if if your server, and we talked about server size, I think we talked about server sizing already, where, I mean, you want a powerful enough machine that can serve up content and have multiple concurrent connections. If not, then that is also a good idea. Well, not also a good idea, that is usually required. And based on the type of business you're running or the operations that your website is carrying out, you may want to scale up or scale down the resources used to carry out those operations. So essentially, the denial of service attack will seek to bring your server to its maximum capacity in terms of how many connections and how many resources or how many copies of the resource it can serve up at a time. Denial of service will always try to maximize that. And if you have one source hugging all of the resources, then it goes without saying that other possibly legitimate requests for data might be rejected, may never come back on time because one other resource is just using up the resources. One other requester is using up all the resources. So that's essentially the crux of a denial of service attack. They just, I just said they flood their server with requests, and then other legitimate users who come, maybe they wanted to window shop, maybe they wanted to actually spend their money, they can't get onto the site, or it's taking extremely long to browse the site, and then they just get frustrated and leave. So this one can cost you or the business with whom you are affiliated. It can cost you / them money. So it's important to know about that one. Another type of attack is packet sniffing. So I've actually done this one already in college, where they implemented some system one time. I went to NCU, so they had that chapel attendance business going on at the time, but it wasn't as sophisticated as it is now. So one time what they did, they went down there with their computers, and then they connected the laptops or whatever machines to the open Wi-Fi. So of course, you have your secure WPA2, blah blah blah, but then they added the open one, and for some reason they used the open one and not the secured one. So they were there sending data across that open network, and my friends and I, we were experimenting with Linux Backtrack at the time, which I don't know if you ever used it. It comes with a whole lot of hacking tools. Granted, for good reasons, but I mean, a white hat hacker has to know what a black hat hacker knows, right? And I'll explain what those two expressions mean. But anyway, we sat down there. I think Kane and Abel. You have quite a few of them. I think one Kane and Abel is the one that we were using. I think you have Wireshark that does it also. And we sat down there and we observed the traffic going across the network, and we saw some common calls being made. All right. Oh, Kalino. Oh, that's what the Linux distro is called, no? All right. So we saw some of those calls being made, and we actually got to the point where we tried to spoof one of those calls because we could observe the traffic and decrypt what was in the packet headers, etc. So packet sniffing is really about sitting down and observing the traffic going across a network, and well, I mean, if it's open, then you can see what is being sent. All right. I was also in networking class when the guy was showing us, our lecturer was showing us how packet sniffers work. And well, Sheldon, you're joining us on the second slide. The previous slide was about denial of service, so you haven't missed much. All right. So our lecturer was showing us how packet sniffing worked, and he actually sat there and he he showed us all the computers that were currently on that open network, and then he could click on a computer. I remember the tool he used, and he clicked on that girl's computer, and she was using. He could tell what she was doing, so he could see her internet traffic. Basically, every page that she was browsing to, the packets were being sent, and he could intercept them. And she was also using, I think it was MSN Messenger at the time, and he could intercept them also. All right, so that's how powerful this packet sniffing thing is ultimately. Now, if you notice though that you see that it's really referring to protocols that are not secure. So HTTP is not secure, but then you have HTTPS, which and yeah, it's pretty much a man in the middle, right? The man in the middle is intercepting packets. Man in the middle is, I don't want to say it's a bit more, because packet sniffing is at the end of the day what it does. What the man in the middle does. However, man in the middle is usually a bit more malicious in the sense that he can actually spoof a response. So he can stop the packet and then reform the packet or whatever and spoof a response to his favor. I've actually seen or heard of cases of that, really, where two guys were there brokering some $1 million deal of sorts, right, via email. And then it's like after a while, one guy stopped getting email from the other one. So he was wondering, did the guy like default on the deal or whatever, something like that. So he gives him a call. And this is probably like 2-3 days into it, right? So 2-3 days he receives no email from the guy. He's curious, so he calls him. And when the guy got the call and whatever, he's saying, no, but you and I talked about this and the payment arrangements are about to be made and blah. So it came to it where the only reason they knew or they could prove no was one man showed the guy who stopped receiving emails showed him up to his email trail up to the point where he stopped receiving emails, and then the other one showed him the entire thread beyond where the email thread for the other man stopped. So actually there was somebody who was there monitoring that, and then he started intercepting. When him see the money part start coming and look interesting now, he started to spoof responses impersonating Trevor Williams, right? And set up the man to pay to his bank account, basically, the payment arrangements and everything, right? I think they caught him. I don't remember. I think they called in some security firm who could retrace and blah, blah, blah. That was an example cited by a security expert at some forum I went to one time. So essentially, that's what packet sniffing can lead to. And as you see here, the person can actually listen to the information you're sending. They can read your IMs, your emails. They can see what you're doing. You see a password if it's being sent to the server. Once again, the only way to beat that is encryption. So the S on HTTP, usually that's when they put on an SSL, secure sockets layer, yeah, certificate. You get the HTTPS. Most e-commerce websites. Hey, if you are about to spend money with a website, especially with your credit card, if they do not have the HTTPS, do not use that website. All right, some of them, they don't invest in it for themselves, but they just route you through PayPal. So I mean, PayPal is probably one of the more secure payment gateways. So a lot of websites, instead of taking on the task of doing a gateway, you would notice that they use PayPal. Right, so there's that. But if you're on a website that is HTTP and they have their own payment gateway and that gateway page is still HTTP, do not, and I repeat, do not put your credit card information on that site. Your credit card will cease to be yours, or will cease to be secure right there. Right, your information gone a road. Cool. So be cognizant of that one. All right, password cracking. Now, password cracking, I mean, we all can deduce what this one is. We see it in the movies, even though that's most of the times that movie setting is a very, 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 very big fairy tale. But I mean, they do have the right concept. So you have two main um, techniques to that. You have the brute force attack, where they just try things, right? So they try every possible permutation of a password. Of course, that's why the longer and the more dynamic your password is, it is harder to brute force, which is why you have these strict standards on websites, no fewer than 7 characters. Some websites will tell you you must have at least one uppercase. Some tell you must have one uppercase, one number. And some are more secure than others, or some enforce higher security levels than others. But essentially, all of that security is really to help mitigate against bootstrap um, brute force attacks. And yeah, like Sheldon is saying, the more powerful the machine, the faster cracking will be. But then, um, rainbow tables. Explain that one to me, Yannick. Just type out how that one works in the meanwhile. All right. But as much as the machine is powerful and may be able to compute faster, the more secure your password is, the harder. So I don't know if you all heard about Snowden. I can't remember his first name, right? So Snowden, Edward Snowden, right? Is Edward or Patrick? But Snowden basically came out with a whole lot of intel. Yes, Edward, you're right. Edward Snowden came up with a whole lot of information on security and security breaches and violations of people's rights, blah, 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 done by the US government. So his advice is not to use a password, but to use a passphrase, right? So of course, once again, the more complicated your password slash phrase is, the harder it will be to brute force. And then the dictionary attack, which between Sheldon and Yannick just identified that it's pretty much the same as the rainbow tables. They use software that sequentially tries passwords based on common words that may be used, um, and then common combinations, and then it starts getting out of hand and trying to find patterns. All right, so these are two methods that people use. And I mean, the packet sniffing is also another way that people try to get passwords, because I mean, when you're logging into something that is HTTP, your traffic is being sent in a very unencrypted manner. So if I'm sitting in the middle and intercepting that, then boom, I get your password, especially if it's not hashed, right? So as web developers, you always want to, um, even if you don't have HTTPS enabled, you always want to ensure that you're hashing your passwords before you send them across the network. All right. So that is an essential bit right there. Um, all right. So ways to mitigate against that, you can force users to have secure passwords like we established, and you can also block an IP address from logging in after a number of attempts. So you probably do that at the firewall level. You can probably keep a log at the application level also, but because that would signify maybe somebody's trying to brute force his way into the site. So every time he's trying to log in, he uses a wrong password. So that's why they would tell you after 3 attempts, like I think on Gmail, that you just have to reset your password or recover your password, because they're saying, hey, clearly if you were really here, or if you really had an account here, then you would know your password. So if you don't know your password, then it's either you reset it or you just stop. Right? So that's one of the techniques that people employ to secure their sites. So moving on, we have phishing. Now, admittedly, I've been caught by this one. Um, I was in college, I think, and Twitter was just coming out. Twitter and Facebook were just, emerging as social media platforms and blah blah blah. So I got a link. I don't remember how I ended up getting that link. And they were saying sign into Twitter to win something, blah blah blah. So I mean, I saw the glitz and the glamour. I signed in. And then when I signed in, it just redirected me back to Twitter's homepage. So I was saying, so how am I just sign into Twitter and I have to log into Twitter again? Right? So I logged in. And then by the time I logged in, my account done send out about 60 porn links in DM to how many people. Right? It was a travesty. So essentially, phishing is when uh, a malicious individual will spoof, fake, or whatever appropriate word you want to use there, some website in an attempt to get your credentials to the actual site. Right. So here you see an example of PayPal. Cool. Now, one way to know a phishing scam um, quickly is to observe the link. Make sure you look at the link and see that the link looks proper. So if you look at that example link there, you see HTTP slash some IP address slash PayPal slash blah 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 blah. Say PayPal.com is a big established website. PayPal now give you no HTTP slash any IP address in its address. So those are the things you can look out for. So like when I look back at my own, I saw HTTP Twitter and like it had Twitter A dot co dot something. So it wasn't twitter.com. So had I been a bit more cautious, I would have avoided that travesty. So essentially after that happened, I had to go and change my password. Right. So whatever bot, because usually it's bots, it's not people really sitting down and doing this individually. Most times they're sorry. Most times they write and automate a script or two or a few scripts that will once they get credentials through that phishing site, this script will now start to execute login and other commands on different sites automatically. I mean, pretty much people know nothing to do because I don't know, I don't know what would get into me and possess me if you really want to sit down and write a script to do that maliciously. You don't have nothing to do. Need a girlfriend or something, man. Sure. Anyhow, so actually in Jamaica this is rather popular, and I know that couple government agencies and even banking institutions have fallen prey to this attack. So sometimes I know of a situation where this lady, she worked at I think it's Ministry of Finance or something, and she received an email seemingly from BOJ saying fill out this form with some form of financial information. So I mean, BOJ send an email, you answer the call. You understand? I mean, it's BOJ. So she clicked the link, and sure enough, she filled out the form. And I mean, whatever it was about the site, it wasn't enough. I mean, BOJ's website, I don't know if they updated it, but it's not the most glorious site. So it's not like you expect something looking very, very pretty anyway. But anyhow, she volunteers all of that information, and then it turns out it was just a scam. So by the end of the day, whoever it was had her money, right? So I mean, there are certain little things that you look out for. I know that they have raised awareness about these kinds of attacks in more recent times, in a bit to reduce the number of people who fall prey. and sometimes to the detriment of the organization and not just the individual. All right, so the phishing scam is a really, 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 really that one is tricky. It can be tricky, especially since you can design any site to look like any site nowadays. All right, so before I move on to the next slide, I have just shy of 3 minutes remaining, so I'm going to kill this transmission, send you guys a new link, and then we'll pick up from there. All right.